physical
like
feelings,
senses,
right?
like
Yeah, it's like I want to feel rough bodies, I want to feel soft bodies, I want to feel hairy bodies, I want to feel silky bodies, you know. I want to feel muscled bodies, I want to feel softer bodies, right?
Welcome to Sweet Release. Hi, Sammy.
Hey, Barbie.
Thanks so much for being here.
Such a pleasure.
I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
We're talking about sexuality, shame, just you as a beautiful human being. So I'd love if you can give us a little background or just kind of, tell us a little bit about yourself and in the realms of those topics, of course, and where it all began or how it felt growing up, if you ever felt different and all of that.
Yeah, sure. Let's see where to start. My name is Sammy. I am, I guess I would say I'm a sexuality enthusiast, a real bona fide deviant.
I love that.
I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, which, I mean, if you know, common to most, Midwestern towns, or even East Coast towns, they're very, you know, um, uh, uh, toxic in terms of masculinity, in terms of femininity, in terms of sexuality in general, right? The acceptance of sexuality. So it was an interesting journey, right? Because when you're dealing with and coming to terms with, the curiosities of sexuality, it's hard to express that in a culture that is telling you not to, right? Where it's telling you, don't be queer, don't explore these feelings, anything outside of sort of the traditional masculine tropes, right? What does it take to be a man, and sort of learning what it takes to be a man from the men who were raised in this toxic culture, right? And that's taught from their dads and their dads and so on and so on. So growing up in a city like Detroit, you have to fight for your ability to explore your sexuality, right? And it's an interesting process too, right? Because and I would say, and really this was 20 years ago, 25 years ago, um, that I really started my exploration of sex and sexuality and gender and sort of all that it encompasses. Um, so for me personally, I would say that, first off, when I took the steps of exploration, I had to protect myself, right? Sort of, and what I mean by protecting myself, right, is sort of secretly exploring, right? I would do whatever it took to explore my sexuality in certain kind of ways, which I can talk a little more on in a bit. But, I couldn't sort of do it openly. Not sort of. I absolutely couldn't explore any part of my sexuality openly, right? So it was all moved. So I moved around in secrecy. And I think that if you're talking to a mental health professional, right, they would say that's like not great.
Not the best thing to do, but
but I do concur, because while no, it isn't healthy to hold these feelings in and hide them, but I do think there were healthy elements to it, because when you're in the midst of something, right? And if let's not think of it as sexuality, right? If you're training for softball, if you're training for dance, if you're trying these extracurricular activities, right? You sort of put it out there, and then to your friends and your family and to the people that you trust, right? And then once you put it out in the universe, they have comments, right? They have their opinions, they have their feelings, right? What kind of softballs you should be using. I know nothing about softball, or what kind of dance slippers you should be using, or what kind of studio you should be dancing at, or what should it be, ballet? Should it be jazz? Should it be tap or hip hop, right? Whatever this is. So when you're hearing these comments and these opinions from the people in your life that, that you love and they love you back, that affects how you navigate these extracurricular activities. So going back to sexuality, right? What is powerful about the secrecy is that you're not relying on what the people around you think. I mean, overall, overarching, yes, you are, right? Because every, religion has told us that homosexuality and the exploration of sexuality is an absolute sin. So, you obviously always have that looming, but, God's really not knocking down your door. That's just the guilt from within. But when you really have the people around you telling you how to navigate your exploration, it does affect, right? I grew up, in a really racist neighborhood. So if I were to talk about my sexuality with the people around me at the time, I would have been, let's say they would have been okay with homosexuality, and 20 years ago they absolutely would not have been. But they would have steered me away from African Americans, right? They would have steered me away from Middle Easterns. So without having the people around you informing your decisions while exploring, you in return are able to explore yourself without the regards of others, right? You can say yes to things that you normally wouldn't say yes to because you would wonder what your friend thinks or what your sister thinks, your brother or your cousin or your mother, whatever, right? So I do think there is beauty in navigating in the secrecy because you're able to come to terms with what you like and what you don't like, fully unadulterated on your own. And that's really what I found most extraordinary about exploring in secrecy.
I love that. I feel like that's important. I think I talk a lot about exploring. I think it's important for us all to explore our own bodies before we explore with other people.
Love
But
that.
in regards to kink or just pleasure in general, exploration is just so key. And so I do think, yeah, I've never thought about that before, but it's true. Like it's best to kind of hold it dear and hold it close to you, kind of keep it sacred before you unleash to the world in a way.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because I'm commonly asked sort of like, well, if I'm having these feelings, right, how do I say this to the people around me, right? How do I say it to my chosen family? How do I say it to my actual family? How do I, come out essentially to my friends? And really, the beautiful thing is that you don't have to. Your journey in your sexuality is your own, right? And I'm talking early stages. So, when it comes to having a partner, right, a meaningful partner, then yes, you need to come out. You need to be out there. You need to be vulnerable in that way, right? When you're bringing another person into the dynamic. But when it is just yourself, you don't have to tell anybody. I never run home and tell everybody how many cocks I'm sucking, right? It's like, it's not necessary. It's like, it's not even appropriate. It's your relationship with yourself, right? And specifically in the experimental stages, right? When you're really getting comfortable and knowing. And, God bless, I support you. If, you want to shout it from the mountaintops, hell yeah, go ahead and do it. But we're not fools. We're in a new age where we're seeing the world, differently and more openly and more expressively. But, as we've seen, the political climate, especially, we're still being held back by these archaic notions of sex and sexuality and gender, that is, which is just like draped in homophobia, right? So you have to still navigate that, right?
Yeah, and how do you? Because society is still so fearful, I think maybe is a word, of just these differing like sexual orientations. And I feel like so many people, it's still just such this hot topic, or it's difficult for so many people to understand. So how do
Yeah.
you navigate that still? Has it changed in the last 20 years?
Oh yeah, that's been a really, that's been an incredibly exciting journey. And honestly, to be frank, that's kind of been navigating my sexuality, politically, is kind of been my superpower. I think it's like so extraordinary. And when I think of the great things about myself, right? Because we have to love ourselves before we can love anybody else.
Mhm.
At a young age, I realized that I had these queer feelings, right? And at such a young age, I didn't quite know where they landed or how they felt. And honestly, I didn't need to. There wasn't anything at the time, right? And I'm saying young, I'm saying like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. I was like, I had rumblings inside, right? That I could not express really until puberty. That's when it started, coming clear to me what everything was sort of meaning and where, the fire was sort of burning. Um, but as you sort of mature into teenage years, into young adulthood, right? I was really trying to walk the line, right? Sort of with femininity and masculinity, right? And that's sort of in my voice, in my presence, in my hobbies, in my skills, in my likes, and the things that I like and the things that I didn't. It was sort of like it was a little queer but a little masculine, right? A little
Mhm.
hetero. So I always walked a fine line of, well, it could swing either way, right? And that's not easy to. That is hard on a young person, right? Because, really you want any sort of young child growing up, coming to terms with their unique sexuality to just be able to be out and open, right? And so I was very sort of diplomatic about it, right? I would sort of lean both ways depending on the day of the week, depending on the subject, depending on the room, depending on the men in the room, depending on the women in the room. um so it was interesting. Now, what I think technically we would call that code switching, right? And I still fully code switch to this day, right?
Mhm.
If I'm working with artists, then I'm like the biggest femme fag in the room. And then when I'm with like the execs in the boardroom, then I just kind of toughen up, shoulders back, pull the wrist up a bit. Um, but for many years, I really sort of walked the line. And I think that was positive for me to, be able to, sort of be fluid in the conversations in the rooms. And I don't live sort of like a straight line of a life. I'm really across the spectrum in terms of places that I visit, right? Whether I end up in right wing rooms, I end up in liberal rooms, I end up, in sort of like multi-billion dollar, penthouses. And sometimes I'm in like a crack den in the corner of some horrific city. So I am pretty fluid in that sense. Um, but then as I sort of, matured and sort of realized that, there's a great movement of people now more than ever really sort of fighting for their voice, fighting to be heard, fighting to be seen, in terms of their sexuality. And really, not even nobody wants to pinpoint their sexuality right now. Just everybody's fighting just to have any kind of freedom, to explore and be whoever they want at any given hour of any minute of every day, right? That sort of shifted from within me to be like, fuck this. I'm going to just be sort of as queer as I want whenever I want, right? And I sort of phased out, the code shifting as much as possible, in sort of my, everyday life. I think when I'm trying to like close a deal when it comes to work, then, I have no problem, being a different version of myself. But that's just a competitive nature that's sort of aside from, you know, my sexual nature.
Yeah. Well, I think it's beautiful being fluid, and a lot of us are, whether we're role playing or at home or at work, having that beautiful kind of contrast is what makes life so freeing and comforting and healing in many ways. So I love that.
Yeah, the idea of fluidity is so fascinating. Because like when I start to think of sort of like what the early stages were of me being turned on, right? It was kind of like essentially like a fluid body part, right? It was sort of the ass, the human ass.
Mhm.
And I've always been obsessed with ass. And even to this day, sometimes I'll just like stare at asses and I'll try to figure out why I love it so much, right? And it's like it's the different shapes, it's the mediums of hair, it's sort of how they're looking, how they're bouncing when they're walking, how they look when they're bent over, right? And so I still don't fully know why I love ass. It's just something that I absolutely love, right? We can't really explain why we love things. We just love
We
them.
just do.
But at a young age, right, I knew quickly that I loved asses, right? And what sort of got the wheels turning in terms of sexuality is that I would be looking at, if you're looking at two asses, right, side by side, and you turn one and you're like, oh my God, those are both beautiful asses. And you turn one body over and it's, the body with on the other side is a vagina. And then the next body they turn over and that body has a penis, right? And then you're kind of like, oh, well, I love asses. Here's an ass with a vagina. Here's an ass with a penis. Like, why would I love these asses despite what's on the other end, right? And so that is what really got the internal conversation going is, well, I guess I just love asses. It doesn't matter what's on the other side of it. And so that was sort of really honestly the journey of, and, the questioning of like, oh, well, if I just love these asses, what's the difference, right? You're kind of just like, puzzling in the rest. So that was kind of like the first stage into questioning myself as to, oh, well, what do I like here, right? And that was, in a society that was like, well, no, 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 you are a man with a penis. You identify as a man with a penis. You love a woman who identifies as a woman, with vagina. So, so yeah, that's when I first started breaking the mold, really, and that was at a very, very young age. I think that was around like somewhere between like, you know, 10 years old, 10, 11 years old. Um, yeah, but that always sort of fascinated me, right? That sort of those common denominators we have as
Mm-hmm.
humans. And
Yeah.
really, like the only thing that differentiates ourselves are the genitals on the front end. We all have tits, we all have ass, we all have feet, we all
Mm-hmm.
have armpits, right? So yeah, that was sort of the first steps in sort of the questioning and figuring out, you know.
How would you define your sexuality?
Um, my sexuality, I, I what I love about sort of defining sexuality, which defining my gender, is kind of by not defining it, right?
Yeah.
Essentially, like, listen, if I'll walk into any room, right? If I have to fight for my right to be whoever I want, I'll be fluid. I'll do what it takes. I think that I consider myself queer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I consider myself gay. I consider myself bisexual. I consider myself, sexually non-conforming, right? But I prefer to, at this stage of my life, identify as queer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that is, well, first off, it's a word that we've sort of taken back, right? It's a derogatory term, queer. But we've sort of been taking it back over the last half decade or so. So I prefer to walk into any room and say, or any situation, and say, I'm queer, right? Because then I have the free range, right? The fluidity to be whoever I want, to have, emotional and physical relationships with anybody in the room, right? Who I just have a genuine, connection with.
Do you find that it's, yeah, the connection that draws you in before the looks and all that?
Oh,
Or are you both?
of both.
Yeah.
It's both. I mean, like, I don't like to limit myself. Sometimes I hate the motherfucker, but like, oh my God, they're so fucking hot. And then, sometimes I love that. I love the person in front of me, but sexually there, isn't, much chemistry. So it can go either way.
Mhm.
It just kind of depends, sort of like who is in front of me, right? And sort of what road we sort of walk down together, right? Um,
Was there ever a time where you kind of let yourself explore and you let yourself, dive in, and that led to kind of feeling empowered?
Oh my God, yeah. I in terms of my exploration, right? I think that I am, like I said, like I am sort of a connoisseur of sex. And it's interesting how that changes, as you age, right? Going from like a young teenager to, and then into your late teens and in your 20s and into your 30s, right? I'm constantly exploring, right? I am constantly seeking out new sexual explorations, right? And I always have. I think that, and that's a big part of why I kind of like travel around the world too,
Mhm.
because different countries react to sexuality different. Different countries have different ways they have sex. Different countries celebrate different kinks, right? And sort of in when you're traveling around the world, you're seeing, facilities where in groups of people that are welcoming you to those kind of different kinds of ways to explore your sexuality, right? So I think that like there's so many, we would be here all night, Barbie.
That was a good one.
um I guess let's see here. I think sort of we can go back to my first one, right? Really sort of I think my first sort of really wild exploration. I was on a Hawaiian island, and I was living with a group. I had four other roommates. There were five of us in this apartment on Oahu. We had this gorgeous little apartment in Waikiki off of the LOI Canal, right? And and so everybody was also fucking each other. Everybody was just fucking each other. And it was so wild and it was so crazy. And we were very young too. And so it was getting a little toxic and we still wanted to be on this island because we sort of fought so hard to get there. And it's also very expensive to stay there, especially when you're teenagers. And so we were like, okay, we've all kind of fucked each other and uh, we couldn't really deal with our emotions, right? And we were teenagers too. So we weren't even really that good at sex, right? Because teenagers aren't normally. And so I was trying to figure out, and my name was on the lease, right? So I was like, oh my God, if everybody bails, like my credit's going to be ruined. So I was like, how can I bring everybody together in this meaningful way, right? And so I stuck into a bar, and I was too young to be drinking at the bar, but I had put on like a white t-shirt and I went to the back of the building and I went into the kitchen and I put the white t-shirt on. I picked up like a bus tub, right? And so it looked like I worked there. And then I just like walked to the front of the restaurant, threw the bus tub down and threw my shirt off and then was in like my street clothes so they wouldn't ID me. And I had met this really beautiful couple. It was a male and a female identifying couple. And and they were very sexy and like they knew it and I knew it. And so I just kind of like shimmied up to them. And they were in their early 30s at the time. And like I said, I think I was 18. I was 18 at this time. And they were just sort of by the early conversations, they were sexually explorative, right? They were sort of pushing the boundaries and it was very flirty, right? And so I was like, they're like, well, who are you? What are you doing? And I sort of talked to them about the problem that we've all kind of fucked each other and now we're fucked. And so they were like, well, I was like, I'm just trying to figure out what to do. And they were like, well, actually, they were like, they hosted up in the mountain, they hosted this tantric workshop. And so they were like, if you and your crew, and also full disclosure, a lot of not all, but a lot of swingerisms and swinger groups and tantric groups are all heavily populated by like 60 plus, 50, 60, 65 plus, right?
Mhm.
So they're like not a lot of spring chickens. And for anybody that's exploring, swingerism as like a young person, you first off, you have to be like, if you're a man, you have to be with a woman. If you're a woman, you can hang solo, right? But like, I do encourage you to check out, as a young person, swingerism communities in your neighborhoods or your cities, because Because when you're young, you're like a hot little property.
Yeah, you're the commodity for sure.
Yeah. And usually there's always another young person there, another young couple there, and then you guys can just kind of like team up and, sort of look out for each other, which is really meaningful and super important when you're putting yourself out there vulnerably in these sexual ways. So I was like, yeah, we're all like, hot young teenagers and in our 20s, and they were like, you guys should come, you should come to this workshop. It was like a weekend retreat. And so, I convinced everybody to go. And it was this really extraordinarily eye-opening experience because we're all human, right? So we all had crushes on each other, and some people more than others. And so we all dipped in, right? And we all screwed. And then all these jealous feelings came up, right? And it was like, well, does he like her more? Does he like him more? Does she like, is she like they who like what, right? And now what are these relationship dynamics, because they were kind of all coupled up, right? And they were kind of passing each other. We were passing each other around. And so when you practice or study tantric, right, there tends to be a lot of sort of group workshops where one person is lying on the ground, and then the group of men and women and those, in between are sort of around you, and you're being guided by a trainer to do these certain moves on the body, right? And it was so incredibly inspiring because we had been fighting about who should be or shouldn't be fucking who. And then we were sort of put in this situation where we all sort of, none of us were the dominant ones, right? We had somebody walking us through what we were doing, right? So we were all kind of the subordinate actors in this scenario. And we were all essentially like, tantric is more, it's a great deal of touching and how to touch, right, in the right spots to do that, the androgynous zones and whatnot. So we were all sort of in it, being directed. I felt like at one point I was like, we're just like little toddlers here. I know we shouldn't really refer to toddlers in that way, but like we were all
playtime.
yeah, we were all just like little Muppet babies, and they were just sort of like telling us what to do, and there was this aha moment, right, where we were just like, none of that shit matters, right? It is all ego. It is all ego from our fathers. It's all ego from our mothers. It's these constructs that were put into place by society, by the government. And, we were raised to think that no, it just had to be one person, right? We were raised to think, no, it had to be the specific gender that we were mating with. But then we were all just sort of like, dick deep at the same time. And we were in like this beautiful, mountain villa. And, it's really broke down the walls in a meaningful way where it was like, hell no. It's like, we actually don't, like, we can share each other in this way because that's what we want to do, right? We all actually want to be sexually liberated, but we're so, harshed down by, the fucking religious houses that we were born into, right? By the parents we were grown into and the grandparents, right? So that was a defining moment for me, right? I was 18 years old. It was, I was in the cusp of adulthood, and I was a part of this group experience that allowed us to really like break down the walls and just kind of say fuck it to how we kind of knew it to be at that time.
I love that. What a first experience, or what a
It was so wild. It was so wild, but with
so
that
beautiful.
Yeah, that being the first experience, then you're kind of like trying to one up that.
Yeah,
as the years go by.
exactly. Yeah. So have you done a lot of more group? I mean, tantra is one thing, but like group experiences in general, is that one thing that you love to do since you're kind of queer? Do you dabble into experiencing couples and group play and the swinger lifestyle? Is that one of your many pleasures?
Oh my God. Yes. I love a group. I think the more the merrier, right?
Yeah, me
I think
too.
the more bodies, the more body types, the more, I love big things. I love little things. I love shapely things. So, and I guess like maybe I'm a little ADHD in that sense. No, I've fully been diagnosed with ADHD.
You are.
But like I
You like
love
variety.
yeah.
I'm similar.
Absolutely, absolutely, right? And like I don't get me wrong, like I do like in my relationships, like I love a constant too. Like I love a one person that's a ride or die and that you can depend on, right? And I think that if you really do have a real honest closeness and intimacy, you can have that ride or die and still be experimenting with a bountiful, amount of bodies. But I love a group. Oh my God. I think it's so fun. I think, the transfers of energies, I think is just so exciting and just sort of like feeling the different bodies, right? Because I think like sex is feeling. And I'm not talking about like emotional feelings. Yes, sure it is. Can and it also can't be, but like the physical
Like
feelings,
senses,
right?
like
Yeah. It's
mhm.
like I want to feel rough bodies. I want to feel soft bodies. I want to feel hairy bodies. I want to feel silky bodies.
Mhm.
Um I want to feel muscled bodies. I want to feel softer bodies, right? I think it's so fascinating and so exciting. So I love a group. I
Mhm.
love a group that just comes about naturally.
Yeah, the
I
organic ones are the best.
Yeah, yeah. But don't get me wrong, I love to schedule a group. I
Mhm.
love that we are here for, to meet at this time in this venue for this amount of time, fucking cut the bullshit, drop your clothes, and let's sort of, speak with our bodies too, right?
Mhm.
Because I think it's so lovely to get to know people and then to embark on a sexual experience. But I also equally love like not knowing anybody, right? I think what's so fascinating is like, take the personality, take, the voice, take the mannerisms out of the equation and just speak through, raw sexual, magnetism. I think it's a whole voice that's fully neglected, right? Sam as Sammy in a boardroom, Sammy in a recording studio, Sammy at a party, right? Is totally different than Sammy naked in the sheets. And so like I speak different languages, right? The same way I would speak Spanish or I would speak English, right? It's like, yeah, it's still the same voice, but it's a, you're moving differently, you're acting differently. And sort of my voice is a sexual prowess is is like really bold and stands all on its own. And also sex is nerve-wracking too, right? It's like your first date. It's like, you're not that's why like I hate first dates and I do try to go on like a second one because like, we get nervous, right?
Mhm.
We're not fully ourselves. And so it's like I may sort of hate your personality, but like I shouldn't say hate. I may not like your personality, when we're having coffee, but like I like absolutely fucking love your sexual personality, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's interesting to understand that you are a complex human being and you have different voices depending on what elements of your body and your life that you're speaking with at any given point in time.
Yeah, that's well said and beautiful. I think that's important for everyone to know is like there's so many different facets to us, or I kind of sometimes call them like core erotic desires.
Mm,
There's all these different desires within us and tapping into those and just welcoming all the uniqueness of you is just so important.
yeah, I absolutely agree.
What are some of your kinks if you're comfortable sharing or some
Ooh.
pleasure?
My relationship with kinks is so fascinating. And I kind of I took stock in it sort of recently because I what kind of blew my mind was that my sort of kinks that I'm just fascinated right now, right? And they shift and they change and they mold. And sometimes you lean into it and you realize that you didn't like it that much. And then other times you lean into it and you're like, holy shit, I like I love this more than ever, right? Um, and so when I was taking stock, I was like, wow, how did these kinks that I love right now, I actually hated. I hated 10 years or 15 years ago, they rubbed me the wrong way. I keep saying, hey, I need to stop using that term, but they rubbed me the wrong way. And it's so bizarre to think how much I love them right now. So yeah, with that said, drum roll, please.
Drum roll.
I'm very much into lingerie right now. I've always kind of been into lingerie, right? And that's in it's women and it's men, right? I like lace. I like anything soft to the skin. I love fishnet stockings.
Yes.
And in particular, I love to rip the fishnet stockings. And luckily, they're like pretty reasonably priced. So
yeah, it's okay to rip them.
Yeah.
I actually like wearing ripped stockings. I think there's a look to that too.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's sexy. I love, I particularly right now, I love masculine men in very feminine, like silk lingerie right now. I think it's so fun. I think it's so wild. Yeah, and it's totally getting my blood going.
I love that. Do you ever put it on?
Yeah.
Yourself?
Oh,
Yeah, you too?
yeah.
Okay,
Totally.
fun.
Yeah, I had a boyfriend over the pandemic who loved it, and so like we really had nothing to do, so he would just order underwear all the time, and so and that sort of really kind of lit that fire. So yeah, I have quite an extensive
collection.
Yeah,
nice.
That's like for me and also for my friends who come by. My love elves.
I love that. That's fun. Yeah, I can kind of relate to. So did you not always like lingerie? Is that one of the ones that you kind of didn't?
I had, and this is I loved it on women. All of the girlfriends that I've had, I would always do like I loved for like birthdays and for holidays. I would always like suggest that we do lingerie swaps, right? Like I know you want to give me this birthday, but let's just do like dinner and underwear, right? I just thought that it was really fun. And I would do that with my girlfriends, but I wouldn't do that with my boyfriends or the men I was fooling around with. And I was like, and I realized that was actually a form of internalized homophobia, right? It was this sort of notion of like, no, lace panties and G-strings and thongs are for, those who identify as women, right? And that's all that goes, right? And because of that, like, it didn't turn me on because it's like not okay. And then you get heady, right? It's like I'm trying to get horny, but now I'm thinking about what my dad would say if he saw me in front of this guy with lingerie, right? And it's like,
exactly,
oh God. And that's it. That's internalized homophobia. That is, an arm of it. So I had worked through that, I didn't like that. I noticed that I was doing that and I did not like that. And I was like, no. And what it did, it took me wearing it, right? To be like, ooh, this is sexy. This is fun. But then it's like, I don't want to keep looking in the mirror. I'm like, you put it on. And then that sort of, snowballed from there.
Love that. Yeah, I have a similar one where I remember when I was dating this dom, or we started talking, and he was like, do you have any hard limits, having that boundaries conversation. And I was thinking about things and I was like, I don't really love like bruising and like bleeding and, all these things and feces and, like those hard limits. But then I was also like, I don't think I would ever want you to slap me. But now, like slap across the face is like one of my favorite things. But there were a few relationships early on, and I think I just didn't maybe trust them fully. I didn't feel vulnerable enough to experience that. And finally, when I felt that, like I remember asking for it for the first time, and it was just like amazing. And to me, it's more sensory. It's not so much the degradation or kind of the humiliation power play dynamic. It's that sting and like channeling that through my body. So but
well, I do like a little bit of degradation, but it's interesting when it comes to slapping, right? You have to be careful as a man, right? Because let's talk societal norms. It's like, no, you don't hit a woman, right? We know this. We know this from a very young age. So we are more conscious of how we're, smacking women, sexually and playfully, right? There is a fine line with men because when culturally when we grow up, men are known to beat the shit out of other men, right? And so you can very easily lose sight of that. Once I was like, I was with a man and he was like, like I get rough, and I was like, well, yeah, I get rough too. I like to be smacked. And this motherfucker fucked me up. I was like beat my ass, and I was like not like really, really beat my ass, but like really fucking knocked me around. And I was like, holy shit. I was not ready for that. Actually, in that situation, I had a bruised rib. It was kind of horrifying.
Oh my God. I remember actually, this was like the Wednesday before, what is it? Blackout Wednesday, the night before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
I went out.
That was the Thanksgiving weekend.
Oh my God, no way. This was when I lived in Pasadena with my sister, and I came home and I let this guy slap me a bunch, and she was like, Barbie, oh my God, your face. I was like, it's fine. I didn't realize this was going to bruise.
Well, that is what you need to be careful of, right? Is the bruising. Because, and I think it's more commonly to have your like ass smacked than it is to have like your face smacked. So you can hide the ass, you can't hide the face. But before you do go into that kind of rough play, you have to understand, you have to ask yourself, do you bruise like a peach? and do you have to show up to
take
work?
Precautions.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But I do think though, once also I was with a partner who liked to choke, and they didn't really understand how to choke, right? And there's a great deal of research you can do online, and it's really when you're choking sexually, you sort of grab sort of the outer core, the outer of the neck, right? And because what you don't want to fuck with is this breathing path right here. And a lot of people don't understand that, right? So they'll go into choke you and they'll fuck up this breathing path, which can bruise your vocal cords, which can, obviously, if you go so deep, it will collapse yeah. And you can get into you can get your body physically in a lot of harm. So you do need to be careful, and you do need to research. And that's for, the person in the dominant role and the person in the subordinate role, because when it does come, when it does come to, sexual violence in terms of role play, and you have to know what you can do and what you can't do, so you're really not physically hurting your partner.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that one up. Asphyxiation, like playing with breath play, which I've talked about a little bit, but I actually had someone recently ask me a question, and they were like, yeah, I'm just terrified of it because of, death. I was like, well, shit, that's like very drastic. But I guess it's true. You do, like you said, there's an art to it. And I think that's something you should never, that's not something that you do by yourself either. I think that's important to have it as a partnered activity if it is something that you're into. But it's kind of educating yourself first before exploring, and then taking those baby steps, and always communicating throughout and having those safe words or safe motions, throughout.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in my sexual exploration, right, I think when I was growing up, I found myself more, when I was a younger age, you find yourself with the people around you who are inexperienced, right? But sort of the older you get, and with the internet, right? Everybody's on the internet, and you can find people on the internet who have these interests, right? And so I look for somebody with experience, right? When I really want to try something new, I won't go to somebody and say, hey, do you want to try this? For the first time. I seek out somebody who's sort of an expert in that, right? In that field, in that kink, in that, sexual exploration, whatever road that takes you. So then there, and I will say, and because I am conscious of it, right? So that I'm actively searching for people with experience. So you have these positive experiences, right? When it comes to, sort of heavier on the violent side, or, or really anything. They will walk you through it, right? They'll teach you about limits. They'll, explain to you, like they'll be, conscious of like your body and how you're reacting, right? So when you are experimenting and you find somebody, online really, um, who is a pro at it, then you're going to A, be much safer, B, really learn, how to play into this, correctly, in the best way possible. And C, you'll wind up enjoying it a lot more, right? And then you as that peer will one day become the teacher.
Yep, full circle.
Icons only.
What are some of the you mentioned before, you travel a bunch, and I do feel like was where my that was where my kind of adventure spirit came from, and I think that's why my sexual spirit is also very adventurous, is because of the travel and exploring new places and countries. But what are some of the unique sexual kind of personalities of some of your favorite countries?
Ah. Where to start? Where to start? I think I particularly love Mexico.
Okay.
Mexico is wild because it's essentially it's the great American West, right?
Mhm.
And and so oh my god, I'm trying to think what is my favorite in Mexico. CDMX, Mexico City, right? And also Puerto Vallarta and sort of the surrounding cities around it are really sexually explorative and wild, right? This is where sex work is legal. So you can, if you want to try something, if you want to explore something, and you're not comfortable asking your partner, if you're not comfortable asking somebody in your community or your town, right? Because it's so small and it can get back to you, right? The gossip. This is all for hire in
Mhm.
Mexico, right? You can go to a brothel, you can go to, a sex club, and you can pay to experiment and to try these things. And I love that. And I do believe that's the same for Amsterdam as well. Where they're really, allowing sex workers to put themselves out there and to be accessible. So I love Mexico in the sense that like like I'm not against paying sex workers for sex. I think it's wonderfully no strings attached.
Mhm.
Especially when you're in a committed relationship, right? It's like hookers are really not going to blackmail you. They're really just there to pleasure you for the pay, and then you leave. And they're also not going to fall in love with you, right? They're not going to fall in love with you. They're not going to fall in love with your partner.
Yeah, there's like a legal boundary there,
Yeah,
kind of.
yeah, yeah. So I love Mexico in the sense that it's the great last of the Wild West. Um, I think Spain is such a hyper sexualized country, and it's so gorgeous and so wonderful. There's a lot of places where you can just sort of hang out, have a drink, get to know somebody, and then have sex, right? You can rent a room, or there's a lot of sort of sex clubs in Barcelona, particularly Madrid as well, where you can hang out, get to know people, get comfortable, get a little buzzed up, and sort of take it from there. um I think that's really beautiful. um uh
Do you have another one on your mind? Your little giggle.
I was just trying to think. It's like there's so many countries. I would say though, I had an interesting experience in North Africa this year, and to sort of go, on the sort of opposite spectrum, sort of like I was in Morocco, and this is where, it's a Muslim country, right? So there is actually no sex outside of marriage. Homosexuality in any form is illegal, and as hypersexualized as my life and my world is, I went on a couple dates while I was in Morocco. I won't say what specific city, in case I go back there again. But it was interesting because you can't show any affection sexually in public, and that's just not. It's not just two men, but it's also men and women, right? What's wild about it is that you can show love. Men can show love as family members. So it's this hype. It's this from the outside. It's this hypersexualized world, right? Where grown sons, and fathers are holding hands, right? Grown men are sitting on the laps, like 25, 35-year-old men are sitting on the laps of their grandfathers, right? It's so bizarre and it's so sexy. And you're like, holy shit. And I was like, and then like, I'm on, certain dating apps and they're like, hey, let's meet. And so you're going out in public to meet, and there's also no booze in these, Muslim countries as well. So you're just kind of meeting for teas, and you're having conversations, and you have to flirt, and you have to, sort of sexualize the conversation in such different and unique ways that isn't as blunt and straightforward. And that's kind of a restriction that is kind of a kink in its own.
It's arousing, I'm sure.
Yeah. And also it sort of throws you off your game, right? It's sort of like, like Samantha in Abu Dhabi, in the Sex and the City films. It's like, no, you can't put yourself out there. You have to sort of hold back. And it was such a fascinating learning experience to me, right? It actually kind of took me back to like, grade school, like when I was in Catholic school, and, trying to like flirt with the boys around me with like not letting them know, but seeing if they would pick up on it. But that was a really wild experience in being in a country where, sexuality will put you in jail. And so you sort of have to, experience and evoke these emotions in almost an adolescent way, right? In the way you sort of did when you were, in your primitive years, trying to figure out how to navigate sexuality without being so blunt about it.
Yeah, can I borrow a pencil? What was it? I don't even know. I think that's what I did.
Give me the pencil, sharpen.
That sounds right. I love it.
No, I'm good. It's pretty sharp. Thanks. Okay.
So good. Yeah, that's so interesting. And I do think you're similar to me in the way that your adventurous spirit doesn't stop at, your sexual spirit. It's you're traveling and all of that. So it's cool to try new things.
Well, I think for anybody that's trying to experiment sexually and just can't break out, who's just like so nervous and let's be real, just like so afraid to explore that side of you in your hometowns or in your cities, get that fuck out of there. Get the hell out of town. Go somewhere where nobody knows you. Nobody knows you. So you don't have to worry about your reputation. You don't have to worry about any kind of backlash or repercussion, right? Because that's what it is. We don't want anybody to know that we're this kinky. We don't even know that we are interested in the same sex or interested in somebody who, is, non-binary or, gender different. So go somewhere where they don't know you, where you don't have a reputation, where like book a fucking flight. I love to travel with friends. I love to travel with groups. So when I travel solo, which I do primarily, I love a vista. I love a gorgeous view. And then I love to know, like, how is this culture sexually driven? And how can I, like, will there be places for me to, like, stick my dick in? So it's really fun. And it's like, it's low stakes too, right? It's like, nobody's going to know. So treat yourself to like explorative trip where nobody knows you, and don't worry about everything that you have to worry about or that you choose to worry about, where you're from.
That's great advice. Do you have any other advice for people that are dealing with shame around having, bi-curious thoughts or same-sex thoughts? And
yeah, I think when it comes to the shame of having, thoughts, is that like, at first you will, right? As I said, we grew up, we don't know. It's like, my father recently over the holiday, I was talking about a homosexual friend that we knew. And I was like, well, yeah. And he was acting like an asshole. My dad was like, well, why? And I was like, well, because he's dealing with inner homophobia. And my dad was like, well, if he's gay, or if he's bisexual, how is he dealing with homophobia, right? And I was like, well, Dad, I was like, we grew up in a house. It's not okay to be gay, right? When I came out to my father, what we had to work through, and bless my father, he's like such a lovely man who really who really came around quite quickly and educated himself, quite well. I was like, Dad, like the worst thing, and I can only speak for American culture. I guess I can speak for Italian culture too, to a certain degree. But the worst thing a father can hear in this age is not that you killed somebody, not that you raped or molested somebody. The worst thing you could tell your father is that you are gay.
Wow.
That is so common. That is so common. And I'm talking about in every fucking state in this fucking union.
Mm-hmm.
The worst thing you could do is tell your father you're gay. Not that you killed a man or a woman drinking and driving. Not that you, robbed a bank. It's telling them that you're gay, right? And this is coming from the Bible. This is coming from our parents and their parents and their parents, right? So you have this inner homophobia, and it's not your fault.
Mm-hmm.
It's your fault if you continue to push a homophobic agenda. That's your fault. But it's not your fault that you are homophobic. It's not your fault that you're dealing with homophobia, because this is what we've been taught our entire lives. We in schools, in the family, in the religion, right? These are our three, and in government, and in absolute government. Queer people were only allowed to marry 8 years ago, right? 2015 is when we overturned. So it's okay that you are homophobic, right? And I'm saying it's okay because you need to understand that you're dealing with internalized homophobia as somebody who equally wants to and is interested in exploring sexuality, right? And that's what you have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest with yourself, because that's the only way that you are going to put forth effort, right? Whether it's through research, reading, studying, online, therapy. You have to understand that about yourself first in order to take the first steps to deal with that homophobia, to break through that homophobia. I still am. I am unapologetically queer, really, truly. But I am also, and I have internalized homophobia. I've done a great deal of work because I wanted to rid myself of this cancer, right? But I do find myself being like, holy shit, like that's so homophobic. So I'm like, and it's not like what I'm saying at a party or out loud. It's what's going on
your
in here.
Internal dialogue.
Yeah. It's like, no, bro. You are fully homophobic. You need to step back and reevaluate that, right? So, as a person that's coming to terms with their sexuality, you have to come to terms with the fact that you have homophobic feelings. And you can work through that with self-help books. You can work through that with, if you're not a reader, with cinema. There's some extraordinary queer films that will help you deal with it, right? And you'll see how these characters act and react, because films are based off of people.
That's a great idea,
they're dramatized, right? And it's like, and self-help books are a lot, right? Sometimes 350 pages is hard to swallow. So you can get that in films, right? What's wonderful about this day and age, especially in the post-pandemic era, is that therapy is online. You can reach out to, they have so many online therapists who deal with people coming to terms with their sexuality, and you don't have to tell anyone. You don't have to walk into a building.
Right, it's virtual. It's all virtual
you
nowadays.
Can do that all, even if you have a partner, right? I do my therapy at work. We have soundproof rooms, and I fully do my therapy at work, and it's horrible when my therapist makes me cry. My therapist makes me cry. It's the shit I say. Yeah, I walk out, and then my team's there, and I'm like, I'm sorry, guys. But I think that therapy is a really incredible way to do it. And you can do that in peace. You can do that, quietly, without anybody knowing. Um, and also, like, sort of, I said earlier, you don't need, if you're curious, if you're experiencing, you don't have to tell anybody.
Mhm.
This is your sexuality is a part of the relationship with yourself. And
Mhm.
you do not have to disclose that to anybody until you're ready.
Right.
And the more I'll tell you, the first few times, the first couple times, the first year, the first 2 years, 3 years, it takes time, right? Everybody's on their own schedule, their own calendar. But, you don't have to share that with anybody. You can, and I think it's incredibly freeing once you become to the point where you're comfortable enough to share that. It's so wonderfully freeing, and I push everybody towards that. But, when you're at the front end, hell no. Keep that shit to yourself.
Yeah, take your time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's a common misjudgment, right? It's like, okay, I'm having gay feelings. Come out. Come out, god damn it. And it's like, no, you don't. You don't
Yeah,
have
you
to.
don't want to pressure yourself to do
Yeah,
anything.
yeah. Because
Mhm.
we're out there. There's way more fucking fags and all the in between who will shout and scream from the mountaintops for you, right? So you can just take your time and when
Take
you're
it
ready.
slow.
Yeah, and you're ready. If ever you get to the point where you want to shout it out, yeah, you'll have that, right? And I'm saying that as an American, right? I'm saying that
Mhm.
in the free world, right? So if there's anybody listening, from predominantly Muslim countries or, African countries or, countries in the East where, governments are, killing people because they're queer, governments are putting people in internment camps because they're queer, right? Obviously, that's a different situation, and you have to really navigate that a lot more, a lot differently, and a lot more delicately. Um, but for those who are in the U.S., who are in Canada, who are in Mexico, who are in Western Europe, you know, that is my advice
Great advice. Thank
to
you. Cheers to that.
you.
As we're wrapping up, I would love to know. I love asking people, since this is the Sweet Release podcast, that last time you had that sweet release
Ooh.
and any and all details, whether it was solo, partnered, whatever you want to share.
Yeah, I had I'll speak on a buddy of mine from just a few days ago, 48 hours ago.
Mm.
This is a man who's bisexual, right? And it was we have really great chemistry, and I have a lot of partners or lovers or buddies, whatever you want to call them, who
Mhm.
are, who are absolutely identify as bisexual men. And this was actually a turning point. Oh my god, it was a hell of a night. I will say this, when it comes to experimenting with men of the same sex, right? Like, it's not serious. It's really not so serious, right? It's two bodies slapping meat, right? So like, so you need to kind of relax, and when you're going up here, it's in your head. It is hard to relax, and I get that. And so like, what I love about this particular guy is that like he loves a cocktail, he loves to sip whiskey or tequila, and he loves to smoke a joint, right? So we just kind of like kick back, we catch a buzz, and then just sort of like relax. This was pretty wild. We went, he got at 5:30. He got at my house at 5:30. We were clothes on the ground at 6. And we were going at it until like 10:30.
Love it.
So it was like it was a pretty meaty session in terms of time. But what's fascinating, what was so different about this experience was that he is incredibly quiet and incredibly closeted, and he doesn't want anybody to know about his endeavors, his experimentations with men, right?
Mm.
And so he has certain rules, right? And it's sort of when we are fooling around, he can't really kind of look at me, right? He wants
Oh,
to see the
wow.
body, he wants to see, the cock, he wants to see the ass, but he won't look me in the eyes. And I get that. And we have like really great chemistry. So like obviously there's enough there for me to have interest to keep hanging out. And so, we have been hanging out probably for about 4 months now. And it is really fire. Our chemistry is really fire. And so in this particular hang, he was actively looking at me in the eyes, right? So this is probably about the 6th time we've fooled around together. And so it was interesting that, we just sort of crossed that threshold where he looked me in the eyes. And I had noticed that, right? There was a particular moment when we were fucking that he looked me in the eyes, and I was like, he kind of like turned and moved. And I was like, wow, okay, we're here. And he was like, yeah, we're here. Like,
Aw.
I'm comfortable and ready to do this, right? And I was like, oh, that's so lovely and beautiful, right? And I do have a lot of, partners where it's sort of like I need particularly somebody at my level, right? My level of, bravery to explore and to do these things. And so, but for special ones, right, you have to sort of, go slower, right? It's what I was saying before, is that when I was trying to explore, I would look for a pro, right, instead of a rookie. And so now, I am in more situations a pro than a rookie. It's sort of like, yeah, you are helping this person work through this and guide their way through this. So we entered a new phase. So I'm really excited.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, that was really fun and exciting to sort of get to. But
yeah,
that was the last sweet release party.
I love it. Was it good orgasms?
Oh my
More
God.
than one?
It was actually
I
incredible.
was going to say that's a long night.
It was really extraordinary. And I do commonly say this because this is how I like to live life, but the sex is so extraordinary that there was a moment where I was like, this is one of the best. This is one of the best. This is some of the best sex I've had in my entire life. And I try to say that as often as possible. And I only say it when I mean it. I'm not just trying to fucking win a medal for every. I live for an orgasm. I live for sexual expression. Like, it's so important to me to maintain a healthy life. Like, I don't give a shit about my career. I don't give a shit about anything but the orgasm. That's really what it comes down to.
Preaching to the choir. I fully support.
Yeah, I mean,
Totally
life
agree.
is beautiful, and we're not here by choice, but my orgasm is definitely a choice, and it's incredibly important to me. Yeah, I am always fighting for the best kind of sex, and there was a moment during the session when I was like, "Holy shit!" This sex is so fucking fire right now. It's definitely on my top. And I don't keep like a top 10. I think it's totally fine too. I have just sort of like a top bracket that like I'll just like,
keep it in your mind.
Yeah,
like, yeah. You just trumped the number 5 on the list. Good job.
Yeah, but it was just like the hands, the fucking lips, the fucking cock, all of it was just like next level, and it was really extraordinary. It was so fiery and fun.
Yay. And special for him. How exciting.
I know, yeah.
That's probably why it was so fire. All the layers were building and
totally. And that's the thing, right? You sort of like you built you not at first, when it's new and you're just exploring, you're not that comfortable, right? It's like the first dates fucking suck. You ever shouldn't be really that hard on yourself or the other person on the first date. I mean, unless they're a monster. But like, it just takes time to lean into it and to get comfortable. Shouldn't forget that.
Yeah, so true. Well, Sammy, I really appreciate you coming on and feeding us your wisdom.
Oh my God, it was such a pleasure.
About all the things and sharing and being vulnerable and all of that. I really appreciate you.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Barbie. I loved it.
I love you.
Love you.